small Wisconsin town gave America one of its most popular cheeses. One local restaurant turned an ordinary hamburger into a national favorite with a single simple change. Even the frozen pizza sitting in millions of family freezers began inside a tiny tavern. Yet ask most people where these foods actually came from, and Wisconsin is probably the last guess they'd make. None of these foods came from giant corporations. They started with hardworking immigrants, family businesses, and everyday people who weren't trying to make history. They were just solving problems, or trying to make something a little better. Today, we're counting down 10 foods you had no idea came from Wisconsin, and a few of these stories are even wilder than the foods themselves. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. You might be closer to one of these stories than you think. Let's start with number 10. Cold packed cheese. Most cheese spreads come from a factory. Wisconsin's version began with a question. What if leftover cheese didn't have to go to waste? In the early 1900s, Wisconsin cheesemakers often ended up with small, perfectly good pieces of cheese left over after cutting larger wheels. Throwing them away meant losing money, so they looked for a better solution. Rather than waste those scraps, they blended different natural cheeses together, added a few basic ingredients, and gently heated the mixture until it turned smooth and spreadable. The result was something brand new. It stayed fresh longer, packed easily, and tasted rich and creamy. Before long, families were spreading it on crackers, sandwiches, and fresh bread, and what began as a practical fix quickly became a Midwest favorite. This wasn't just about making great cheese, it was about finding new ways to enjoy it. That spirit of experimentation helped shape Wisconsin's dairy industry into one of the most respected in the country, and it pushed cheesemakers to keep chasing new flavors and new products. Cold-packed cheese is still made in Wisconsin today, showing up at football parties, family gatherings, and holiday tables everywhere. Most people snack on it without ever knowing its story. Started with cheesemakers who simply refused to let good food go to waste. Next, though, Wisconsin's dairy story takes a stranger turn, one that begins with actual bricks. That's the story behind number 9, brick cheese. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary block of cheese, but its odd name comes from something almost nobody would guess: actual bricks. The story begins in 1877, when a Swiss immigrant named John Jossi settled in Greene County, Wisconsin. Like many cheesemakers before him, he wanted to recreate the rich cheeses he remembered from Europe. There was just one problem. Wisconsin's milk was different. The climate wasn't the same, and his old methods weren't giving him the results he wanted. Rather than give up, Jossi started experimenting. During the aging process, he placed clean clay bricks on top of each wheel of cheese. The extra weight gently pressed out moisture while helping the cheese develop a smooth texture and rich, buttery flavor. Local customers loved it, and it wasn't long before they'd given it a simple name of its own: brick cheese. As Wisconsin's dairy industry grew, brick cheese traveled far beyond the state's borders. Decades later, pizza makers in Detroit discovered that its creamy texture and crispy edges were perfect for baking in deep steel pans. Even today, many chefs will tell you authentic Detroit-style pizza isn't complete without it. One cheesemaker's fix for a milk problem ended up shaping one of America's most famous regional pizzas. Up next, though, Wisconsin's food story leaves the dairy farm behind entirely. This one starts inside a pharmacy. That's the story behind number 8, malted milk powder. This next Wisconsin creation was never meant to become a milkshake favorite. It was built to solve a far more serious problem. In the early 1870s, an English pharmacist named James Horlick moved to Racine, Wisconsin with his brother William. Parents at the time often struggled to find nutritious food for babies and for people recovering from illness, especially through the long winters. The brothers set out to create something both healthy and easy to store. After months of testing, they blended malted barley, wheat flour, and dried milk into a fine powder. Mix it with water or milk, and you had a nourishing drink that lasted far longer than fresh dairy. They called it malted milk. Doctors recommended it. Travelers packed it for long journeys. Explorers even carried it on difficult expeditions, since it was lightweight and didn't spoil. Before long, soda fountains discovered that stirring the powder into ice cream created a rich new flavor, and that drink eventually became the famous malted milkshake, a staple in diners all over America. A health product for sick children unexpectedly became part of everyday life, proof that some of the best food ideas show up while people are trying to solve something else entirely. From here, Wisconsin's food story leaves the pharmacy behind for a family bakery, where an old European recipe slowly turned into one of the state's most beloved pastries. That's the story behind number 7. Kringle, one of Wisconsin's sweetest traditions, didn't begin in America at all. It crossed the Atlantic with Danish immigrants searching for a new life. In the late 1800s, many Danish families settled in Racine, Wisconsin, bringing generations of baking knowledge with them. Among their treasured recipes was a delicate pastry called kringle. It was already well known back in Denmark, but the bakers in Racine slowly adapted it, working in local ingredients and their own techniques. Making a kringle was no small task. Bakers folded butter into the dough again and again, building dozens of thin, flaky layers. After shaping it into its signature oval, they filled it with fruit, nuts, cream cheese, or pecans and baked it until golden. What looked simple on the outside actually took years of practice to get right. As more families discovered its flavor, kringle became a holiday staple across Wisconsin. Visitors passing through Racine often picked one up to take home, helping its reputation spread well beyond the state. Today, Wisconsin is so tied to kringle that it's officially the state pastry, and bakeries ship thousands of them across the country every year. A family tradition from across an ocean found new life and became one of Wisconsin's best-known foods in the process. But the next entry on this list didn't come from Europe at all. It came from one restaurant owner who believed a hamburger could taste even better with a single addition. That's the story behind number 6. Butterburger. Most hamburgers get topped with cheese, bacon, or a special sauce. Wisconsin took a simpler approach. It started with butter. In the 1930s, restaurant owners across the state were looking for ways to make their burgers stand out. Instead of piling on extra toppings, they placed a generous pat of butter directly on the hot beef patty just before serving it. As it melted, the butter mixed with the meat's natural juices, creating a flavor customers couldn't forget. The idea sounded strange at first. Plenty of people assumed butter would just make a burger heavier. Instead, it did the opposite. It kept the meat moist, added richness, and turned an ordinary hamburger into something people would happily drive miles for. Before long, diners across Wisconsin were serving their own butter burgers, each one claiming to have the best version. That friendly rivalry helped the burger's reputation spread far beyond the state. Today, visitors from around the country put a Wisconsin butter burger on their must-try list, and national chains have introduced millions of Americans to the state's signature creation. Big food ideas don't always need a long list of ingredients. Sometimes all it takes is one simple change nobody else thought to try. Next up, though, this list heads out of the restaurant kitchen entirely, into a small workshop where one inventor was chasing crispier, juicier fried chicken. That's the story behind number 5. Roasted chicken. Fried chicken had been around for generations. But one Wisconsin creation changed the way restaurants cooked it for good. In 1954, an inventor named L.A.M. Phelan from Beloit, Wisconsin, believed there had to be a better way to fry chicken. Traditional deep frying often left the meat dry, while baking took too long for busy kitchens. Phelan wanted the best of both worlds. After years of tinkering, he built a special pressure fryer that cooked chicken under pressure while it fried. The process sealed in the natural juices, cooked the meat faster, and produced a crispy golden crust without any greasiness. He called the method broasting, a mix of broiling and roasting rolled into one system. Restaurant owners noticed the difference right away. The chicken came out tender inside, crunchy outside, and nearly identical piece to piece. Perfect consistency for a busy kitchen. Before long, broasted chicken had spread across the U.S. and into restaurants in dozens of countries. Even now, most people assume broasted just means another style of fried chicken. In reality, it's a trademarked cooking method traced back to one Wisconsin inventor who refused to settle for ordinary frying. One clever fix in a small workshop ended up changing restaurant kitchens across the globe. From here, though, this list moves away from restaurants entirely, toward a small tavern and a recipe nearly lost to time. That's the story behind number 4, Tombstone Frozen Pizza. Frozen pizza is a freezer staple today, but one of America's most recognizable brands began in a place you'd never expect, a small tavern sitting across from a cemetery in Medford, Wisconsin. In 1962, brothers Ron and Joe Simic, along with their partner Ed Tatich, ran a neighborhood bar called the Tombstone Tap. The tavern was known for its homemade pizzas, and as demand grew, regulars started asking if they could take one home to bake later. The owners saw their opening. They began preparing pizzas, freezing them, and selling them to nearby grocery stores. Since the tavern already sat beside a cemetery and carried the Tombstone name, the frozen pies naturally became Tombstone Pizza. Production started small. Pizzas made by hand, deliveries kept close to home. But word spread fast. Families loved having restaurant-quality pizza ready in their own freezer, and sales kept climbing. Within a few years, Tombstone had grown from a local favorite into a nationally recognized brand, changing how Americans thought about pizza night. Millions of people have baked a Tombstone pizza without ever knowing its story, started in a tiny tavern beside a quiet Wisconsin cemetery. Coming up, though, this list swings back to the diner. This time, a burger with one unexpected topping. That's the story behind number 3, the ice cream sundae. Sometimes the best inventions come from breaking the rules, even small ones. In the small town of Two Rivers, Wisconsin, a soda fountain owner named Edward Berner ran his shop in the late 1800s. At the time, local blue laws restricted selling ice cream sodas on Sundays. Berner didn't want to turn customers away, so in 1881, he tried something different. He served scoops of ice cream topped with chocolate syrup, the same syrup normally reserved for sodas, but skipped the soda water entirely. Customers loved it immediately. The combination was rich, simple, and completely new. Since it started as a Sunday-only treat, locals began calling it a sundae, and the spelling eventually shifted to Sunday, so it wouldn't sound like it was mocking the Sabbath. Word of the treat spread quickly to other soda fountains, and it wasn't long before sundaes were showing up on menus across the country. Toppings expanded from chocolate syrup to caramel, whipped cream, nuts, and cherries, and the sundae became a permanent fixture of American dessert culture. A law meant to limit a treat ended up inspiring one of the most popular desserts in the world, all because one soda fountain owner didn't want to disappoint his regulars. Coming up next, though, this list heads back to the freezer aisle for one more frozen surprise. That's the story behind the hamburger. One of the most popular foods on the planet may have its roots in a small Wisconsin county fair, not a big city diner. In 1885, a 15-year-old named Charlie Negreen was selling meatballs from a food stand at the Seymour, Wisconsin fair. There was just one problem. Fairgoers wanted to walk around and see the sights while they ate, and meatballs on a plate weren't exactly portable. Negreen came up with a quick fix. He flattened a meatball, tucked it between 2 slices of bread, and handed it to customers to eat on the go. The idea caught on almost instantly. People loved being able to walk the fairgrounds with lunch in hand. Locals started calling it a hamburger, and Negreen kept selling his version at the fair every year for decades afterward. Historians still debate exactly where the hamburger was truly born, since a handful of towns across the country make the same claim. But Seymour takes its claim seriously enough that it now hosts an annual Burger Fest in Negreen's honor, and the town proudly calls itself the home of the hamburger. A teenager's solution to a portability problem may have shaped one of the most iconic foods in American history, but even the hamburger can't top what's coming next. A cheese with a story so simple, it changed American dairy forever. That's the story behind number 1, Colby cheese. The top spot belongs to a food that didn't just become popular, it made history. Today, Colby cheese sits in supermarkets, sandwiches, burgers, and cheese platters all over America. Its mild flavor and smooth texture have made it a favorite for generations. Yet very few people know it was created by a young Wisconsin cheesemaker whose small experiment changed American dairy for good. The story begins in 1885 in the small town of Colby, Wisconsin. A 22-year-old cheesemaker named Joseph Steinwand was working in his father's factory when he decided to try something different. Instead of following the traditional cheddar making process, he washed the fresh curds with cold water before pressing them. That single adjustment lowered the acidity, producing a cheese that was softer, milder, and easier to enjoy fresh. Local families embraced it right away, and merchants soon began shipping it beyond Wisconsin. Rather than dream up a fancy brand name, people just called it Colby, after the town where it was born. Over the years, it grew into one of America's best-known cheeses, and it remains the only major natural cheese ever invented in the United States. Colby cheese did more than fill grocery shelves. It helped cement Wisconsin's reputation as America's dairyland, proving that real innovation doesn't need a massive factory or a big city. Sometimes it just takes one curious cheesemaker willing to try something new. From flaky pastries and buttery burgers to frozen pizzas and world-famous cheeses, Wisconsin's food story is bigger than most people